Hello.
Hello there. Thank you so much for tuning in House at Home Book Tour. I am Monica Fernandez, the media manager at Red Hen.
And I'm Toby Harper, Deputy Director.
We are so excited to host what's going to be an extremely riveting conversation between Rebecca McClanahan and Deborah Thompson tonight. But before we get to that, we wanted to wish a very happy publication day to The Horse Who Bears Me Away, which is a brand new poetry collection from veteran Red Hen poet Jim Peterson. So congratulations, Jim. You can get this right now wherever books are sold. But tonight we're here to celebrate two memoirs that just came out from Red Hen Press. Pretzel, Houdini, and Olive by Deborah Thompson, and In the Key of New York City, a memoir and essays by Rebecca McClanahan. To tell us what the books and kick off, take it away, Rebecca.
Hello. Hello, all of you out there in these virtual worlds that we're living in. So hello to all of you that are here on Facebook or LinkedIn or YouTube or Red Hen or wherever little virtual box you're living in now. We are so grateful you are here to see us. And thank you, Toby, and thank you, Monica, and thank you to all the Red Hen people who have made this possible. I did not know Deborah, who goes by Debbie Thompson, until about a month ago. And I got her book and read it and loved it so much. And when I was told that we were going to be paired, I thought, well, this is an interesting pairing. Do we have anything in common, these two books? I mean, mine's about New York City. Hers is about so many things, but including lots of dogs. I don't have a dog. We'll talk about animals later. But anyway, the more I read, I became so excited, not only by what a wonderful book it is, but also by all the links that I saw that we shared in our books. And one of them was the major life changes, which of course we all go through, but our books really begin with those. And they're very different kinds of changes, because with my life change that the book is about was a planned, and some would say crazy, move that my husband and I made to live in New York at, let us just say, an age. But we had talked about it for decades that we wanted to live there. My husband, Donald, had grandparents there. He knew that place very well. And we talked about it forever and had spent lots of time there. So on Donald's 50th birthday, we said, okay, well, we better just go ahead and do this then. So ours was a planned change, let's say, major life change that was pretty rapid and included selling our house, leaving all the family and friends whom we loved, even leaving our cat to someone to adopt. And it was very brisk and very violent change, but planned. And many other things happened in the 11 years we ended up staying there, including, of course, 9/11 shortly after we moved there, and then my own cancer diagnosis and surgery, among, of course, many unplanned things that happen in all our lives. Debbie's, though, her book begins with a very unplanned change. Although her life had been had a lot of planned things in it, including the marriage, a marriage, and then adopting, she and her husband, several dogs, and planning those and bringing them into her home. And her book begins with a very unplanned and difficult thing, which was her husband's illness and death. And our timelines of our books are kind of similar in that way. So they're like parallel lives. So anyway, there's also a lot in our books about just encounters that we have a lot with strangers on streets, in parks, and also I would say that even though these books are through a personal lens, I think they're very much about our nation, the culture that we are living in, and the history of that culture. And then, of course, there are the animal encounters, which are the centerpiece in some ways, and the thread through which Debbie's book is told. And so I thought maybe we've talked about it, and I think Debbie should read first. You might even want to show us some of these amazing characters you created. Now, you see, these are real dogs, actually, so all of them. But when I read that, I just thought these are just such wonderful characters as dogs. And so could you show us some pictures and maybe read for us, Debbie?
Yes. So that is my dog, Pretzel, and old Pretzel. And then we'll look at Chappie, and that's little Chappie, and Houdini. And these dogs, there's Houdini. And these three, there's 5 dogs in the book, but these 3 are in the first piece that I'm going to read. So this piece starts, this is the very first piece in the book. It's called Let Dog. And it starts when my husband is lying in the living room dying, and I take the dogs to the dog park. June 1st is a brazenly golden day. In the heat of noon, the dog park is vast. I walk around in a daze, checking my cell phone every 10 seconds while the dogs scamper and scout, refreshing the inventory in their nostrils. But I don't understand the sunlight. I don't understand the overwhelmingly blue sky, the striated clouds and mysterious pastel textures, far, far away and near enough to touch. The looming mountains to the west, the horizon to the east, I don't understand. The only reality is Rajiv dying in the living room on a bed that inflates and deflates with a sigh. When that ends, the world will end. Nothing else is real. But dogs will not allow their reality to be denied. Once inside the fence, they do the noses to anuses circle dance with their kind, then trot along to check their pee-mail. Pretzel is already drooling, a misbegotten Dr. Seuss-like character, his spaniel head too small for his leggy body. He's got a crooked underbite that pushes his blackberry nose off center. Now, after clenching his jaw all night, he finally relaxes it into a dog smile. The cockers, too, spring back to life. Houdini, the cocker puppy, runs in 3 wide circles before plopping flirtatiously on a young woman's feet to be admired. Chappie lifts his sharp nose to divine a scent. Locating it, his triumphant tail flaps like wheat in the wind. How can they live this moment in the dog park just exactly as they've lived every other moment for years, as if nothing else existed, as if they don't know that nothing will ever be the same again, that life will, in a few hours, stop being livable? Now, as Pretzel grins, as Chappie inhales, as Houdini scampers, as my husband lies dying, Allie, a grotesquely obese blue heeler whose every snort bears the despair of a last breath, emerges from the shadows, crawls under my palm, and butts it for a petting. Her breath stinks and she teeters dangerously. She has heart and thyroid trouble, her owner apologizes to me. There's nothing more we can do. She's not long for this world. But when I roll my palm along her scalp, her snorting, for just a second, stops. They say petting a dog lowers not only the human's blood pressure and heart rate, but also the dog's. When I pet Allie away from the ruckus of the other dogs, I can feel her vitals calming under my hand. As Allie leans harder into it, I stare at her heavy coat under the startling sun, the dark spots on a white background. In an instant, they switch to white spots on a dark background. It's like the way the patterns of the black and white tiles in the bathroom used to shift for me when I was a little girl, when I learned how to stare hard and then let go. I step back and the mountains become real, and then the endless stretch of prairie, and more real still, the big Colorado sky. The dogs and I are spots. My pulse steadies. I breathed deep enough to howl and open to the vastness where now meets eternity. The moment was quickly past. Back home, we found Rajiv awake and thirsty, though unable to swallow. But when I swabbed his dry lips, he closed them around the sponge end of the swab and sucked the water hard. The sucking instinct is one of the first a baby presents and one of the last a body lets go of. Rajiv was going back in time, back into his animal body, before language or loss. I dipped swab after swab in water and fed them to Rajiv's sucking mouth. At some point late in the night, while I was absorbed in the last rhythms of Rajiv's body, Pretzel jumped back onto the foot of the bed and curled into his pretzel figure, his rounded back touching Rajiv's ankle, his paws not overlapping as usual, but pressed together as if in prayer. He lay in vigil at his master's feet until his last breath. So that's from my first essay, and then throughout the book, I grieve and I change alongside my dogs. And as Rebecca said, her book, like mine, has many encounters with pets and other animals in the vicinity of death and of grief. And Rebecca, you had one such encounter just days before September 11th, 2001, in your piece, And We Shall Be Changed.
I did. We did, indeed. Yeah, that's one of the 9/11 essays. And yes, this happened on September 11th. And again, just to set the scene, we'd been there a couple of years, and we were living in a furnished midtown sublet, 5 floors up. And we had, as I said, when we left New York, given away our cat, and that was really hard for me. But after a while, we settled in. We have a community, reconnected with friends, and made new ones. And so this was, and we finally adopted a cat, a rescue cat named Layla. At this point, I think there's a picture. Toby, is there a picture of Layla? I think we have one. There she is. I don't know if you can see, but anyway, she's just at the window, and beyond her are lots of buildings. And she liked to she's very alert. Oop, not yet. We'll see. The balcony that we had outside was not really a balcony. It was this tiny little ledge where, Toby, let's see, just a minute. Yeah, let's stay on Layla. That's good. Okay. The other one comes later, thanks. But anyway, Layla, the September 11th, and September 7th. And so this is what happened one morning. Donald was getting ready to go to work, and she was waiting, and we just finished breakfast. So here's what happened. And yeah, thank you. Okay, I'm going to read now a brief piece from that. Donald stands to clear the table when suddenly, what was that? A noisy scatter, a crash, and a flurry of fur and claws. Layla leaps from the chair and heads for the fireplace, where something dark is skittering across the metal grate, across the floor toward the bedroom. Then a squeal, a screech, and Layla skids around the corner. A mouse, I think. We've had mice before. But no, this was too large, with a sweeping tail. Now it darts from the bedroom toward the front window, leaping onto the white curtains, the theater posters, the peacock painting, then down again across the floor and into the kitchen. Donald runs interference while I corral Layla into the bedroom and shut the door, then rush to call the super, a handsome dark-eyed immigrant from Montenegro whose young wife and 5 children live in the basement of the building. A squirrel dropped into our apartment, I shriek. What should we do? He answers calmly, as if he's been saving the answer for years. Open a window, which I promptly do, and within minutes a squirrel has leapt onto the sill and out to the balcony. I close the window and turn to Donald. A squirrel, he says, shaking his head in disbelief. Down the chimney? A wounded squirrel, I say, pointing to several drops of blood. On the wall, too, he says. Above the sofa, there where the theater posters have been knocked askew, there are smears of squirrel blood and dark red spatters on the peacock woman painting and on the curtain. Donald heads for the kitchen. When he comes back, sponge in hand, he reports, there's blood there too, on the floor, on the cabinets. We try out scenarios. Was the squirrel injured in the fall, or did he scuffle with Layla? How did he get down the chimney in the first place? There are 5 floors above us, 5 other fireplaces into which he might have dropped, 5 below us too. Why ours? And what was he doing on the roof of a midtown building anyway? The park is several blocks away from across 2 busy intersections. After he cleans up the blood spatters, Donald showers and dresses. We check the balcony where the squirrel has burrowed into one of the clay pots. He needs to rest, Donald says. And reaching for his satchel. I confirm our plans to meet at the International Center of Photography. These are the last few days of Salgato's exhibit, Migrations, and I don't want to miss it. After Donald leaves, I release Layla from the bedroom. No sign of blood on her whiskers, her paws. And after a few minutes, she settles into one of my favorite places, the edge of her favorite places, the edge of my desk, atop a manuscript. I put on my writing uniform, old shorts, t-shirts, slippers. Years ago, I learned if I dress in my worst clothes and I don't comb my hair, I won't be tempted to go out in public. I'll get more work done. The traffic on the avenue is roaring, but the air in the apartment is stale. So I crack the window a few inches and sit down at the desk. Suddenly, Layla hisses, lifts her head. The squirrel is squirming through the open window. His dark, glassy eyes start darting side to side. I run to the window, shoo him back out, and slam the door. I slam the window hard. That's when it comes to me. The squirrel has nowhere else to go. He's trapped on the balcony, 5 stories above the street. Inches from me, he's trembling, raised up on his back legs, his wounded paw held tightly against his pale gray chest. Layla hisses, moves toward the window. The squirrel crawls back into the pot. I pick up the phone and call the super. Don't touch it, he says, as if I would touch a squirrel. I know they're vicious when attacked, not to mention maybe rabid. They're fiercely territorial. The super advises me to call the city. I know what that means, so I decide to wait and talk it over with Donald tonight. The squirrel might be dead by then anyway. He already looks dead, curled in the pot in fetal position, or what I imagine a squirrel's fetal position to be, with his head and feet tucked out of sight and his tail encircling his body. He resembles a Daniel Boone cap. He's breathing, but barely. So yes, the squirrel stayed with us for 4 days, right up into the morning of the attacks, which of course we didn't know were going to happen. So he figures very strongly into the 9/11 memory that I had. Anyway, you had a few, I know most of your book is about the domestic dogs that you had in the encounters, but you had a couple of wild encounters too, right? You had at least one in India. And this is maybe my favorite essay in the book, The Wild Dogs of Calcutta, the Street Dogs of Calcutta, excuse me. And can you, and I believe this was 5 years, 6 years after your husband's death, and you were returning to India to see his mother and to reconnect with his family, right? Right. Okay.
Yeah. 6 years after Rajiv's death, I went to visit his mother in Calcutta. And so this is an essay from, this essay is called Among the Street Dogs in Calcutta, about that experience. And whenever I'm insecure, which is often, I go to the dogs. I seek out dogs, and I always feel better when I'm around dogs. So when I visited my mother-in-law, I was really interested in the dogs that are all over Calcutta. And was kind of studying them and interested in their social structure and who they belong to. And there was one dog in particular in front of my mother-in-law's apartment complex. Outside Ma's apartment building, the mangy, crusty dog lies where I found her the night before. I extend my hand, but instead of bowing under my palm, the behavior offered by suburban US dogs, she cowered back. I expected feral, a lip-drawn snarl, maybe, or a low growl, but this dog is beyond docile, almost servile. She looks up at me from a lowered head. Her dirt-caked nose twitches as if trying to catch my scent, but she will not come closer. Not petting dogs has always been agony for me, and I have indulged in every kind of human canine flirtation to get a dog to accept my touch. But after Rajiv died, the need to touch fur, if not human skin, became almost mammalian, instinctual as a drive. Touch maintains your boundaries. It reminds you that you have an outline, a definition. The raw need for a defining touch, now denied, surprised me amidst my grief. Nobody, not even the grief support counselors, could have prepared me for this body hunger, the animal part of loss. Nobody warned me about the heavy emptiness of a chest no longer pressed, about the craving of skin suddenly deprived of touch, a dissolution that consumes the body like leprosy. It's not lust exactly, or desire, or even longing. It's the way skin cries. Nobody talks about it, but widows know. Dogs know, too. It's what makes suburban dogs leap onto chests and laps despite all training. It's why street dogs might, in time, forego their instinct for survival to bow their heads into a human palm. I will work on this dog, I decide. I will get her to trust me. And then I'm going to pick up, over the next few weeks, I work on this dog. I try to get closer and closer to her. And I'm going to pick up at the last day of my trip, just as I'm leaving. The driver waits for me as I walk around the building, calling for Mishti Kukur one last time. I started calling her Mishti Kukur, which is Bengali for sweet dog. I need to say goodbye. I've got something special for her in my pocket. When I put on my jeans this morning, the first time I wore them since my arrival in India, I discovered a bit of snossage in the front pocket, left over from a trip to the dog park back in Colorado. It's stale, but still smells of artificial bacon flavor. I call it Mishti Kukur's Cove, and her head emerges, bowed below her shoulders. Her nose is evaluating. She makes eye contact, drops her eyes immediately, but when I encourage her, looks straight at me. I hold out the snossage. Her jaw drops into a tentative smile, and she pads towards me with only an instant of hesitation, as if she recognizes and even trusts me. After I hold out the snossage and she takes it from my hand, she retreats 2 steps, but only 2. I'm going to miss you, Mishti, I say to her. Will you miss me? I hold out my hand for her to sniff. She keeps several inches between us, her nose so caked with dirt, I don't know how any scent molecules could get through. Then I remember the water bottle I have holstered in my fanny pack. I cup some water into my hand and offer it to her. She looks at it, then looks at me. I look away to show her I'm not interested, not threatening. She risks it, inches forward, stretches her pale tongue, takes a quick lap, and then another. I pour more water into my cupped left hand, and as she laps, slurping now, I set the water bottle down and touch her head with my right hand. Under my fingers, the dirt crunches as my pat turns into a stroke. And now I will abandon her. Will she remember me, look for me? Will she find another human? Will she risk belonging again? From the car window, the first step of my long journey back to my very touchable dogs, I look at Mishti Kukur one last time. She's still waiting, watching me as her small brown body recedes into the dirt. So I think that grief has a way of attuning you to the more than human world. And I know that's certainly true in your book, Rebecca, where you're very much attuned to these unexpected critters. And one such encounter takes place with strangers in a park in New York City in your piece, Adopt a Bench.
Yes. I spent a lot of time with strangers on park benches. Don't know what that says about me, but I love their stories. And some, certain days I would avoid them if I needed my time. But quite often I would not stop listening. And Debbie, I was so moved there too by this idea of skin hunger and animal hunger for touch. And, I think that's something that so many of us are feeling now, with not, especially people who have loved ones that they can't get near and can't touch. It is, of course, a human thing, but it's also so much, the animals know that. And I love, being able to drop your blood pressure and your heart rate by touching these animals. And I saw that a lot, even with many of the homeless guys that I would talk with in the park with their benches. I mean, that sat on benches, but with their carts that they would roll. And so this particular encounter happened in a very, which you wouldn't think of as a wild place, but actually Central Park has a lot of wildlife in it. People don't know that. Since its inception, I think there's been almost 300 different species of birds. So birding is a big thing in Central Park. Of course, we all know probably the famous red-tailed hawk, the pale male that so many people have watched. And there's owls, there's pigeons, there's ducks, there's geese, there's bats, there's fish, there's raccoons, there's possums, there's cottontails, there's coyotes. I mean, there actually are some wildlife. But even in the most domestic and quiet and people-centered places, you can find bits of this, and that's what happened today. And this happened in this day. It was a couple years after the 9/11, and there were still some of the benches. This is Adopt a Bench, as you said. If you've never been to Central Park, there are many plaques that are put on the back of benches, and you can adopt a bench and put the plaque that you want there. And there are a lot to people that they've lost. And a lot of the reason is to have that park bench. And I really considered it before my cancer surgery. Like, if I go now, what bench would I pick and what would I put on it? So I really read them a lot, and there's a lot about the inscriptions in there because it was a way to hold, to let people know this loss. Anyway, so at this day, I was sitting on a bench. My husband Donald by then had gotten one of those remote control sailboats in Conservatory Lake, and on Sundays he would often would sail it. It's kind of a kid magnet, kids love it, and there are benches around it. So I was sitting on one near there, and now, say, Toby, can you show the picture now? Yeah, so there it is. Very civilized. You can see the little boats, and then there are benches there. And so I was trying to write a little bit, actually, and get a little space. So I was sitting on a bench. It was actually called the one that says Best Mom on it. I was sitting there, and then this happened. So, okay, I'll read now. I hear the squeak of wheels and sense a presence in my periphery, a large-bodied someone approaching my bench. The stranger has a peculiar odor, not a stench exactly, but a musty, used-up smell. The bench vibrates as the person sits down. I look up from my journal. That's when I see the man's cut-off khakis frayed at the bottoms. He wears a white dress shirt, buttoned all the way up, with a tie clip of Kermit the Frog attached to the collar. A once elegant dinner jacket completes the ensemble. Oh, no, not quite completes, I see. My eyes take in a speckled gray pigeon perched on the man's shoulder. The man stands and walks behind the bench. The pigeon does not budge. I'm thinking, is it Velcroed to his shoulder? Wheels squeak, and a shopping cart emerges, overflowing with clothes, shoes, a toaster, a vintage adding machine. I look away so he won't catch me staring. He rummages in the cart, then takes a seat again. The pigeon is still there, head bobbing, wings tucked in. It doesn't coo, but now and then a burbling sound erupts from its throat, like a soft engine starting up in the distance. The man nods as if he understands what the pigeon is saying. So how long have you had the pigeon? I ask. 7 nights, he says. And then he's off and running, words tumbling ahead of him while he chases after. It seems that the man was playing guitar outside the Met. He's a musician. And the rain started, and the pigeon swooped down and landed on his shoulder and just stayed there. Like baby, he says, pointing behind the bench. I turn to see a strange-looking dog. A Welsh corgi? No, my brother has a corgi. This dog looks more like it's a half German Shepherd, half Dachshund, the man says, as if to answer my furrowed brow. I got her in California. People laugh me out of the park when I say that thought that those two breeds could ever get together. And myself, I'm trying to picture the doggy gymnastics, but I can only get so far. I suppose, though, there are even stranger couplings. Avid birders in the park swear they once saw a tufted titmouse sitting on the rump of a raccoon, plucking fur to use in its nest. The raccoon just sat there and let the bird do it. Studying the dog closer, I don't doubt the man's story. The dog's large face, the big ears, the squat legs, the long torso. I ask him how old baby is. 7 months yesterday, he tells me. She was born on Thanksgiving Day. I celebrate her birthday every month because who knows how long she will last. Maybe it's for me, he says, the celebration, just something small to mark the occasion. A bench, I'm thinking. He needs to adopt a bench for baby so her name can live on, like the names of the dogs on all these park benches. Biscuit, Truffle, Daisy, Earl the Pearl. Lady, he says so quietly it's almost a whisper. I turn to him. He looks around as if he suspects that someone might be spying on him, on us. Look, he says, I want to show you something. He opens his jacket and I see the fine lining. Someone paid a lot for this jacket once upon a time. Maybe the man himself did in one of his earlier lives. It's beautiful, I say. They don't make linings like that anymore. Is it silk? No, not that. He says, look closer. See? I lean toward him, but I see nothing except a few scruffy feathers peeking from the inside pocket of his jacket. He lowers his voice even more, and I have to move closer to hear him. Yesterday, as he tells it, he was playing the guitar in front of the Met. Some kids were pointing to something on the sidewalk beneath a canopy of trees. They said it was a baby bird. It had fallen from a tree. But at first he didn't believe them. Oh, they'll say anything to a person like me, he says. But as they got closer to the sidewalk, he saw they were telling the truth. I asked, was he afraid to touch it? Because some people say, if you touch a baby bird, the mother will reject it once she catches your scent. He answers, no, he wasn't afraid. And by the way, that's a myth about the mother, he said. But he waited around a while anyway, just to be sure the mother wouldn't return. I'm thinking now that a baby bird fallen from so high will not last long. The man leans back on the bench as if sensing my thoughts, says, so I thought, why not put her here? A winged shadow passes over us, a Canada goose maybe, or maybe pale male himself, but I don't look up. The pigeon still positioned firmly on the man's shoulder, pivoting his head nervously, as if sensing danger. Baby, the birthday dog, drowses beneath the shopping cart, her chest rising and falling with each breath. The man slips his hand inside his jacket over the silk-lined pocket. I'm letting her go quietly, he whispers, in a soft place. I imagine the warmth filling his hands, the urgent hammering of the bird's heart against his chest. So yeah, that's part of a rather long poem, a long essay, Adopt a Bench. But you know, comfort and grief, everyone needs that, right? In whatever form it takes for the people. And I think marking that spot for him, it was in his chest, but around the benches it was there, and certainly in 9/11 it was there. All these ways that we find to mark, right? The places where death and life meet. And I loved so much, and I asked Debbie before this to please read that last very brief piece called "The Spot," because it's so wonderful. And so if you would read that, please.
Yeah, I'd be happy to do it. And thank you for those lovely pieces. I just love the tenderness of that essay, the tenderness of the man, and the tenderness of the writing. So that's really beautiful.
Thank you.
This is from The Spot, which is the last essay in my book. And Rajiv died in the middle of the living room on the bed that hospice set up to prevent bed sores. I've been telling this story over and over, these many times, revisiting the same spot. That's how grief works. That's how memory works. After Rajiv stopped breathing and his face relaxed into a death mask, Pretzel jumped off the bed and huddled under the futon, where he stayed while the funeral home took away Rajiv's body, and stayed for the next few weeks, coming out only to eat and vomit and pee. Although house-trained for years, Pretzel started peeing in the middle of the living room, right on the spot where Rajiv died, which I cleaned up, crying, all the more pained, because it was in the sacred space. And then I made the connection. Pretzel was marking the spot. I've told this story before. I will tell it again. The spot remains. No matter how thoroughly I cleaned, and no matter what fancy urine-removing liquid I bought, Pretzel and then my other two dogs continued peeing in the same spot for years, even after I pulled up the carpet, deep-treated the floorboards with kills, and put down laminate flooring. Pretzel kept peeing there. And even after Pretzel and the other two dogs died, and a new set of dogs maintained the spot. These new dogs don't even know about Rajiv, though surely they've smelled traces of him in the house, even still. But they know this is a meaningful spot, meaningful to them perhaps only because they can smell the trace of urine deep, deep down and need to maintain it, to top it. It's a shrine that they maintain in my living room, a living shrine, made in the medium specific to canine communication. They may not know what this memory means, but they know that it means. This is a spot where cultures meet. Along with the bacterial cultures down under the floorboards, there's also the culture of dogs here, leaving olfactory messages across time to future dogs to recognize this spot as a place of meaning. I return to this spot too, telling over and over these stories of dogs and death, searching for new meanings, covering and recovering my words, alert for new messages. I tell them to others I don't know, in the hopes that when you read it, you too will sense meaning and perhaps respond. So that's the ending of my book. And I'm writing here about a personal spot, a spot that bears meaning and memory for me and my dogs on a personal level. Rebecca also writes about those larger cultural collective spots that bear meaning and memory. And in this time of huge, vast cultural grief, as we mourn Ruth Bader Ginsburg and so many other losses, I think, Rebecca, it will do us all good if we can hear from you and end on your piece, Tears, Silence, Song.
Thank you, Debbie. Yeah, this is the second 9/11 essay, and actually, I'm just going to read, of course, a little piece from it. But I was very, very careful not to directly describe the attacks themselves. And so that the first one ends, as I said, that in something that involves a squirrel in the park. And I stop when I first hear the first sirens and don't know what they're about. And then the second long one begins in the aftermath, this tears silent song. That's from a Hasidic saying, which are there 3 aspects of grief. With tears, that is the lowest. With silence, that is the next lowest. And with song, there is the highest. And music is woven throughout my book. Thus the title, In the Key of New York City. It's very important to me. But yes, I was so careful because everyone that was alive then of a certain age has his or her own memory of that and own emotion. And I wanted to find a way to mark that, kind of like the spot. And so between those two, when it stops before it happens and picks up after, there's a half a page essay, the briefest one, that's just an encounter. And that was my way of saying, okay, reader, okay, this is for you. This is your time to put your own story there. And then I pick up. In this last one, and I'm just going to read a very brief piece from it, but it is, there's a reference in it. It's about music and its power. And, you know, as you say so well in your book, and I tried to say in mine, grief is such a mystery. And it doesn't have a timetable. You know, I was a hospice volunteer for years. We learned the 5 stages of grief, but, you know, they don't go in order for everyone. It's like these little ambushes that hit you, you know. And sometimes I think we try to rush through those too much. And you know, this big word closure, like it's going to happen. But I loved your book when you talk about the complicated timeline of grief, and I've experienced that too. And I certainly experienced it in many, many personal ways with people that I love who I've lost. But I also know that with the 9/11, it was the same, that I was expecting to feel certain things the way other people were saying they were feeling them, and I was waiting. And the breaking point for any grief is sometimes just a very simple thing, or something that you don't expect, right? And so that's what this is. There is a reference in here that you kind of need to know if you're not familiar. There's a book, a verse in the King James Bible. There's 2 actually, 2 versions of it, one in Jeremiah, one in Matthew. But the basic translation is, and there was a voice in Ramah, lamentation and weeping, Rachel weeping for her children and would not be comforted because they are not. And so there are various biblical scholars talk about what that really means, but don't need to go into that, except that I was a singer for a long time. I was a music major. I made my way through college singing. And at one point I was singing with a cantata, but I was only 16 at this point. And the choir director came to me and wanted me to do what he called a doloroso, which I didn't know what it was, but it was a lament. And there were no words, which I didn't get at all. And he said, no, this is the part where Rachel is weeping for the lost children. And he didn't explain it to me what it meant. So I carried it with me. But the main thing he said to me is, remember, it's a lament. Don't make it pretty. And so that when you hear that in here, this very short piece, then you'll understand what that's about. So yeah, I'll read it here. And it's about the National Day of Prayer and Remembrance. It happened on September 14th, and it was at the National Cathedral in DC. Of course, I'm in New York here. It's raining, 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 just like it is there. And so I'll pick up there. I wondered why on this day I had no words, but maybe I thought, maybe on this National Day of Prayer and Remembrance, someone does. So I turned on the television. It was raining in DC as well. Umbrellas of every color floating across the screen toward the National Cathedral. The Navy sea chanters sang, and then the boy and girl choristers, their young faces like flowers opening. Soon a brown face appeared at the lectern, a thoughtful-looking man with large, thick glasses. He began to read, Rachel weeping for her children and would not be comforted. And I half expected a mournful Keene to rise up, but only his words issued forth. And then it was the camera's turn, panning across the profiles of presidents. The two Bushes, Clinton, Ford, and Carter, their heads in varying shades of gray and white. They looked so old, so weary, that I had to turn away from the television toward the window. Rain and more rain. Music brought me back to the screen. A bearded man was seated on a chair, cradling, I know no other word for it, a guitar. And as he plucked, he rocked forward, then back, then forward. I watched the rocking and his small, ordinary hands and his eyes glancing up to a tall, stately woman standing beside him. I recognized her from opera broadcasts, Denise something, but I could not call her last name until it appeared on the screen. Graves, of course, I thought. And what a dark name to bear all your life. But if anyone could bear it, this beautiful woman could. Even if I'd muted the sound, her face might have been enough. The broad face haloed by dark hair, the smooth brown plane of her forehead, the high cheekbones, the eyebrows lifted in what? Pain? Surprise? Sudden recognition? Something had entered her, and she was absorbing it even as we watched. She was absorbing it, taking it in as hers alone, and giving it back to us as ours. My throat tightened with each phrase. Thine alabaster cities gleam, undimmed by human tears, yet even those words did not break me. Then, as the camera shifted from her face to the rows of aging men seated together, something shifted inside me, inside them. I read it in their faces. The gray and white-haired men, leaders who had sworn that even in the middle hour of our grief, they would rid the world of evil, were not, in that moment, Bush, Clinton, Ford, and Carter. They were George, Bill, Gerald, and Jimmy. A row of boys swallowing the pain and wincing at the tears forming in their eyes, two of the boys actually mouthing the words. And as she sang, I could almost hear their mothers calling, it's getting dark, time to come in now. And my mother calling to me, and my voice answering. For in the middle hour of our grief, we are always and only children. Thus it has always been, and thus it will always be. And that, I think, is why Rachel was weeping. So thank you again. Thank you, Debbie, for reading from your wonderful book. And thank you all that are still here with us. And thank you, Toby and Monica and Olive Red Hen. And may we find some comfort through our dogs and take a breath and find the skin hunger and appease it where we may, right? And thank you so much. And I hope you all find that as well. And so I think we're saying good night. Debbie, you want to say something?
Good night. So wonderful to hear your readings, Rebecca.
Thank you both so much. It was such an honor to hear you read. Really, thank you.
Thanks so much.
All
Good
right,
night, everyone.
Yes, good
Bye.
night.
Bye. Thank you, guys.
All right. Thank you all so much for joining us. So we'll be back again next week, 5 o'clock PT next week, to hear from Jennifer Risher with We Need to Talk, a memoir about wealth. Thank you again for joining us, and we'll see you soon.